now. So I'm going to turn the floor over to James Conder. Many of you know James from various field trips. It's a pleasure to be able to say that a professional in the wildlife natural history field found us early after his visit and looked us up, spent time, decided we passed the smell test and whatever, all the animal tests, and has stayed with us and has been a big help to us in terms of programming and trips. He did his wildlife studies, and his experience is mostly in South Africa at various different places, and I think all of you appreciate that that's probably the best place for training of that sort in the world. With that, for those of you who might wonder what would have been if you'd gone that route, you'll learn a little more about it, and maybe a few of you will go away thinking, "Oh, there, but for the grace of God, go I." James Conder.
I'm not going to wear this hat the whole evening. No, that was really just for effect. Oh, no. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. I think I know most people here, but if I don't, welcome. My talk this evening, a beginner's guide to being a safari guide. I'm going to be talking very briefly about how I became a safari guide. But I'm going to try and spend a lot more time thinking about what does being a safari guide entail, and probably spend even more time talking about one of my favorite aspects of the job, which is walking in the bush, and what that requires, and some of the more exciting side of that experience. I also probably need to emphasize that I'm not really an expert. I am qualified in the most basic way. I am very enthusiastic, and if I'd maybe made a few decisions earlier on, I would be able to bring a lot more experience. But hopefully, I still have something to share. To just quickly give you a little bit of background. So I've been loving wildlife since the very beginning, really. So when I was a little boy, it took me quite a long time to learn how to speak. My friends will find this unlikely, but to an extent that my mum was rather worried. But I decided to skip mummy and daddy. And so my very first word I uttered at Bristol Zoo from my pram, and I pointed and I said, "Look." Well, I didn't say look, I only had one word, but I pointed at something, went, "Lion." And I was in fact looking at a tiger, and I'm still quite embarrassed about that, but still. So from the very beginning, this is me and my father and his questionable 80s moustache. But you'll notice this, I think, is in the New Forest in England. He has binoculars around his neck, and for a very long time, I kind of believed that any trip out into nature, binoculars were as vital as shoes, maybe even more important. And I remember being very confused when I went for a walk with some friends when I was about 10 or 11, and they didn't have any binoculars. And I was like, what, why, how, what, something's gone wrong here. So I can blame my love of wildlife very much on my father, and then somebody that you would probably all know. I'm just going to keep an eye on the time because I know I'm going to spend too long otherwise. So David Attenborough, I think, has a lot to answer for, and especially the BBC Natural History Unit. So I was glued to the TV watching things like Big Cat Diary as a young lad. And also very early on, I was given a copy of Joy Adamson's, actually, in fact, her sequel to Born Free, Forever Free, telling the story of Elsa and her cubs and how she and her husband rescued and reared this lioness in Kenya. So very early on, I was getting fairly obsessed with Africa and with African wildlife. That led me then to study African studies at university. And as part of my degree, I had my first opportunity to visit Africa. And I went to Ghana. I spent a month supposedly studying, although I don't think I did it. I wrote a single sentence, in fact, but I had a great time. I learned a lot. And during those 4 weeks, I went right up to the north to Mole National Park. And that was my very first experience of actually being in the African bush. And I still remember very vividly arriving at night to the only lodge in the park, which really wasn't much of anything. And I was so excited, and I was just lying in my bunk all night long, couldn't sleep. I was listening to the sounds of the owls, the sounds of the hyenas whooping, all kinds of sounds that I didn't really recognize or understand. Also, sadly, to the sounds of my companion Beatrice, who had eaten some very bad street food on the way up and spent most of that night in the bathroom. And as soon as there was any hint of sunrise, I abandoned Beatrice to her fate. She may still be there. And I headed out, and we were up on this hill, and there was this beautiful waterhole. And I had my binoculars, of course. And I remember scanning this view as the sun was coming up and seeing different antelope, and watching the acacia trees cast their shadows, and these big gray boulders were casting shadows over the savannah. And after a few moments, I realized that these big gray boulders kept on changing position. And of course, what I was really looking at was a herd of elephants coming down to the waterhole. So I was pretty much hooked from that point on, but it took a few more years before I got to return to the bush. And on this occasion, it was to Conder Game Reserve in KwaZulu-Natal, where I spent 3 months working on a research project looking at lions and elephants. And on this trip, I made a very influential friend who you will hear right now. This is not a hyena. This is my friend Dave Haberman impersonating a hyena and trying to lure these two in a bit closer. So Dave was a field guide I was working with on this project.
I think they...
Yeah, it works, yeah. And these are young ones, they're curious.
Yeah.
Come
to breakfast.
I'm just going to let him speak in a moment.
It's the strongest jaws, out of any land mammal in the world. We did an autopsy on these guys, and we had one poached in the Kruger National Park. Not poached, he was shot in a snare. We had to try and pull out the bullet, but we cut steaks out of its head, the size of my hand, about that thick. Obviously, the muscles on the jaws.
So that's Dave, and Dave went on to become an instructor for a company in South Africa called Eco Training. He's still there now. I think he's now the course manager or the academic manager. And Eco Training are one of the leading providers for training of field guides in Southern Africa. And when I started hearing about this job, this little niggling thing started in my brain. And over several years, it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, I called my parents and said, you know, I've got this really good job with the British Council. I think I might want to give it up and go and be a safari guide. And I'm just asking, you know, really for your blessing. And my mum said, well, you're going to do it anyway, aren't you? So what's the point? Yeah, that's true, Mum. So, yeah, I abandoned a career in teacher training, and spent a year with eco training, getting qualified as a safari guide. Eco training, they start very basically. So you spend the first week really just focused on the grasses, so you can identify all of those grasses. Eleanor, what's this one? Gosh, I have no idea either. I've also forgotten. Eleanor is also an alumna of eco training. But by the end of the course, you are conducting bushwalks in areas with dangerous game. You're carrying a loaded rifle, so things kind of escalate quite quickly. From eco training, I went to work for African monarch lodges, who have two beautiful tented lodges in Namibia, in the very far north in the Zambezi region, which you might know as the Caprivi Strip. So a very different environment. People who know Namibia will think of gorgeous deserts, but actually this area is much more akin to the Okavango Delta. It's just north of the Okavango. I was working as a guide with these guys. 5-star lodge. As you can see, the tents are up on stilts. So you have the animals and the elephants passing underneath the walkways. One of the most lovely things is these elephants. If you see here on the walkway, we have the seeds of a camel thorn acacia, which the elephants love. And the elephants would come in and they would shake the trees to make the seeds fall down. And most would fall on the ground, but a fair few would actually land on the walkway. And you could sit on this walkway and the elephants would then raise their trunks up and start to feel around for any leftover seed pods. And you just have to shuffle back a little bit as the trunk kind of started feeling towards you. Eventually, African monarch lodges, they offered me a role as their guest experience manager, which I accepted. And I needed to sort out a few things paperwork-wise for the visa, so I popped back home to the UK. And that was just before March 2020. I straight into my mum and dad's house, said I'll be here for a few weeks. And 18 months later, I was still there. And as for so many of us, life did not go quite as I was expecting. But eventually I managed to get out of home and find the opportunity to reconnect to guiding and to Africa. I got to take part in a wilderness trail, guiding in South Africa. I undertook quite a lot of mentoring also in South Africa to improve my bushwalking skills. More recently, in September, I did a 3-week solo trip through Tanzania, through the most famous national parks. So this was a coffee stop in Tarangire National Park. Also got to visit Ngorongoro, Serengeti, and Lake Natron on that journey. And of course, now I find myself here in the UAE. And as many of you know, I work for Sharjah Safari, which is an African-themed safari park. And my main role there is working with the local guides and training them about guiding and about the animals. So that's a little bit about me. But what I really want to talk about is my concept of what a guide is. I mean, if we look at this photo, I think it would be natural to assume that as a guide, you're interested in all the top half of the picture. you're interested in the wild, in nature. But if that's all you care about, you're probably not going to be a very good guide, because equally important is everything in the bottom half of the photo, which are the people. So you've got to be somebody who loves the wild, but also loves people. And there's probably a couple of main tenets that you need to bear in mind as what you are as a guide. First of all, you're an interpreter of nature. So your role is to educate, is to explain, hopefully inspire. But you also need to be an interpreter of people, because your guests are going to be on safari for a number of different reasons, and you need to be cognizant of those to make sure that they can have the best experience they have. Some people, they're going to want to see the famous animals, the big five, get their snapshot, and then head home to the five-star lodge for a jacuzzi or a massage. Some people are going to want to be out there all day long, and as much as you can, you want to try and oblige them. Some people are very sensible, and they won't really be interested in anything else but the birds. So you can spend the morning bird watching, which is awesome. So yeah, you need to be glancing behind you at the people behind you on your vehicle and seeing where their heads are at. Are they loving every moment? Are they getting bored? Are they getting nervous? Especially maybe if you're quite close to a big animal. And you're also, the other side of that is you're a guardian of nature. So you have responsibility towards your little patch where you're working to make sure that your guiding is causing the least amount of damage, least amount of harm possible. Making sure that as you're driving around, you're not knocking over trees, not even driving over the elephant poo, because an elephant poo is a fantastic smorgasbord of delicious delights if you're a dung beetle. And if you just go straight over it in your Land Cruiser, well, you're ruining dinner and maybe a few lives. And of course, you also need to be very aware of making sure that you're not putting yourself in a dangerous position where a person might get hurt or perhaps an animal might get hurt. And if you tie that together, that just then makes you a champion of nature and a champion of humanity's connection to it. So I guess your ultimate hope is that beyond the safari experience that your guests have had, they're going to go home hopefully with a renewed connection to the wild, hopefully a newfound appreciation for all kinds and all forms of nature, maybe just what they're seeing out of their window or whatever's happening on their balcony at home. Hopefully a better sense of their environmental, sustainable responsibilities, whether they're putting that into practice on a local scale or an international scale. You often get some, because a lot of these safari trips can be fairly costly, so you can end up with some pretty influential people under your care who you might be able to inspire to make some real important decisions for whichever company they run in terms of how it's interacting with the environment. And some people get very, very passionate about certain issues, and they might return home to their own country with a dedication towards a particular issue, such as, for example, a friend of mine who I was on safari with was Vietnamese. She returned to Vietnam with a real passion towards trying to change people's attitudes about rhino horn, where in Vietnam there is this big market to use rhino horn as a medicine, which, as I'm sure we all know, is a medicine which doesn't really have any effect, but is driving the illegal poaching of rhinos. So if you want to be a guide, so a few characteristics that I would say are pretty important. You've got to be pretty tolerant of quite a few different things. You'll be working long hours. You're going to be pretty uncomfortable a lot of the time. Your guests will be in 5-star accommodation. You will be in a tent or maybe a dormitory. Hopefully you'll have the tent to yourself, but you may be sharing the tent with another member of staff. And not all of your guests are going to be wonderful people. Some people are going to come with some pretty difficult demands or difficult attitudes. And of course, you have to smile through it and just keep making sure that you can do all you can to ensure that they have an unforgettable experience. So you have to have this sense of service. You have to be able to feel achievement from waving off those guests, knowing that they've had the holiday of a lifetime. You have to be a good team player. If you're working in a lodge, you'll often, especially a smaller one, there's going to be lots and lots of crossovers of responsibilities. So unfortunately, you don't only get to go out and do the fun things like the game drives. There will be times when somebody has to take the rubbish out as well, and that will usually fall on you. And often some rather unlikely things will be called upon from you. We'll talk about that in a moment. You need to have a sense of humor. That obviously helps a lot if you're telling stories about the wild, to make those stories entertaining. But you also have to realize that all kinds of unexpected and potentially very frustrating things are going to happen to you. And the only real way to respond to those is to look on the bright side. I remember one case, for example, where I had this family that I was guiding they were lovely, but everything had to be just so. And they had very, very high expectations. And especially about, like, they wanted the game viewer. You're in the middle of the bush, but the game viewer had to be pristine. And I remember the previous trip I'd gone, they'd been a bit like, oh, this is a bit muddy. And I'm like, well, okay. But anyway, I was like, all right, we'll have no more complaints. I cleaned the whole thing, top to bottom. I got every little thorn and every little speck of dust out from underneath the seats. Went to park the vehicle, went to collect them from their morning coffee to take them on their game drive. In the 3 minutes that it had taken me to leave my vehicle to go up to where they were having coffee, a vervet monkey chose that moment to descend upon this game viewer and leave a mountainous deposit right in the middle of the front row of seats. So I took my guest down. I said, and if you, you don't fancy another cup of coffee? Just give me 10 minutes. I've got some work to do. So you have to have a sense of humor. And you have to be honest. I think however long you've been working as a guide, you're always going to be asked questions which completely come out of left field that you have no answer to, especially if you're guiding kids. Like, they'll always have some amazing questions where you're like, oh, I've never even thought of that. And I think it's important that as a guide, you're not just going to bluff your way through something, that you're able to admit, you know what, I don't know. But your best response is, I don't know, but, you know, give me a few hours. I'm going to try and find out the answer to that question. And next time I see you, I'll have an answer for you. Or even maybe, you know, I'll send you the answer by email as soon as I can work it out. Another aspect of this is also just having a certain level of integrity. A lot of guides are not well paid and often relying a lot on tips to make their income. So there is a temptation to maybe take shortcuts or to indulge in some unethical behaviors to make sure that their guests get exactly what they want. But there are probably lines where you have to stop. You know, something as simple as, okay, you want the perfect photo. Well, this lion is asleep. Let me just bash the side of the car so it puts its head up and you can get that shot. That's not really the best way to behave yourself around a sleeping lion. Let the poor guy get his nap time in. He's only sleeping 20 hours a day. You're going to do all kinds of strange things, and you're going to need to work on all kinds of unusual skills. This list is from the Field Guide Association of Southern Africa's Learner Manual of just some of the skills you might need as a guide. I cannot profess to having many of these skills, which is great because there's always something new to learn. So obviously a lot of these might be quite obvious, like communication, interpretation, driving. If you're working at a small lodge, you may not have a handyman, so they might be asking you to provide some help with electrical problems, mechanical problems with the vehicles. You'll also need some hospitality skills. So it was always a bad night at my lodge when I was the only person available to tend the bar because I don't really drink. So they would announce it to the lodge manager would announce to the guests, "We're really sorry, but James is going to be at the bar this evening. If you want a cocktail, he will do his very best, but you're going to have to guide him through step by step." Some very surprising things come up. You'll notice here, counseling skills. For a lot of people, coming to the bush can be a very profound experience. It might be something that they've dreamt of all their lives. It might be something that they've saved up for a very long time, and taken away from the bustle of their everyday life and being given opportunity to slow down and connect with nature, reflect, can bring up quite a lot of stuff. And there has been several occasions where there's been some tears around the campfire, and maybe you have to lend an ear to someone sharing their story with you. And actually, that's a really lovely part of the job. So yeah, there's always something new to learn. Your daily life as a guide is going to be pretty full on. So, for example, you might be up at 4:30, getting ready for your morning activities. A morning activity, it could be a bushwalk, a game drive. At Namwa, where I work, that could also be a boat ride. So you've got to make sure that everything's ready for breakfast, the vehicle's ready. If it's winter, you're going to be getting hot water bottles ready to keep your guests nice and cozy. If it's going to rain, you've got to make sure that there are ponchos. You've got to make sure that there's nothing wrong with the vehicles, that the tires are good. And then about 5:30, you might then start your activity, and then you have a marvelous 4 hours going around looking for animals, and that's the real joy. You get back, you drop your guests off. Usually at around 10 o'clock, you've got some other guests who are either arriving or leaving. Now, most lodges are probably going to be in some fairly remote areas, so to get them from the lodge to the road, to the gate, to the airstrip is probably quite a long journey. In Bwabwata National Park, where I am here, it was an hour either way. Although that was actually kind of the best bit, because once you dropped off your guests, then you could make your own way back to camp, kind of at your own pace. And if your boss was like, "You took a long time," you just said, "Ah, yeah, there were some elephants on the road. We're very ethical. We don't push them off. We just let them move aside on their own." So if you're lucky, you might have an hour for some lunch and a bit of a rest. But you've always got a radio with you. So just when you think you've got some peace, the camp manager will crackle to life, and they'll be like, "Oh, James, are you free?" And then all kinds of things might be required of you. So for example, this was burning a fire break around the whole lodge, so that should there be a wildfire coming through the area, we've got a nice bit of burnt ground that hopefully the flames are not going to cross and burn down the lodge. So like a controlled burn. Or maybe one of the maids is sick and they're like, yeah, we need you to prepare a room and make a bed to a standard your mother would never believe was possible. Um, or something even more bizarre, like, James, there's a dead crocodile in the channel connecting the lodge to the river, and we can't get the boat out. Could you take some guys and pull it out? Which is what we did. All the while thinking, well, if there's one this big in here and it's dead, how far away is the next one of the same size, which is alive? And how hungry is it? And if you're really lucky, yeah, you might just get a little bit of a kip just outside your tent. And you're probably tired enough that you don't really need much in the way of comfort. You lie down and you pass out. And then in the afternoon, 3 o'clock, you're getting ready for your next activity for the afternoon. That could be a game drive. That might go into the evening. So the last 30 minutes would be a night drive. Return to camp, tidy everything up. If it's a bigger lodge, then often you might be asked to sit with your guests and host them for dinner, tell them some fun stories, find out what they want to do the following day. Where I worked, we were quite a small operation, so the guides also did the dinner service. So as soon as we had dropped our guests off and sorted out the vehicle, we were then serving them dinner. That might take you to 9 o'clock, and then hopefully everyone's finished and you can go to bed and you repeat the next day. And if you're like me, you might also just take a little bit of time before you go to sleep just to write an account of some of the things that you've done. So I would always make a point of writing a little description of every activity that I've been on, what we'd seen on the way in terms of animals and wildlife. Questions, so like, has somebody asked me something that I don't know the answer to? Or have I just asked myself a question during that activity? Like, what does the dung of the less common antelope look like? I realized, oh, I don't know what a rowan antelope's poo looks like. I should probably find out. I was also trying to learn a few phrases in the local language, which is called a Sifwe, but I think I'd maybe given up by that point. I'd given up actually because Sifwe was kind of the hereditary language, but nobody really spoke it. So I remember asking them, how do I count to 10 in Sifwe? And they all agreed from 1 to 3. And then as soon as they hit 4, everyone had a slightly different idea of what 4 should be, because everyone was sort of speaking different lingua francas of different African languages. It was fascinating. And then, yeah, to talk a little bit more about your ethical considerations when you're guiding. You kind of have a hierarchy of responsibilities. So most important to you should be the safety of your guests. That's paramount, and that, unfortunately, some may say, comes above the safety of the wildlife. But that's also something very important and something you're always thinking about. So you should be avoiding getting yourself into potentially dangerous situations with wild animals, and I'll talk about that shortly. Making sure you're not damaging the natural environment. In some lodges, in some game reserves, you're allowed to go off-road if there's a good reason, like a really good sighting. But of course, it's always a bit of a balance as to, well, is this really worth it? And you want to avoid, working for the tip. So, for example, I remember one occasion I had some guests who were desperate to see, like most guests on safari, they were desperate to see a leopard. Everything else was easy. Leopard is never going to be a guarantee. But we were very lucky that we were on our last game drive and the leopard ran across the road in front of us. It was a young leopard and it went and hid under a tree. So I radioed it into the other game vehicles in the area to say, we have a leopard here if you want to come and see it. We off-roaded a little bit, got a better view, but it was lying under a tree. My guests were really hoping to get like that perfect photo, and it wasn't really playing ball. Some of the other game vehicles arrived as well, so now there are about 4 or 5 vehicles in the area. the leopard took flight and it went underneath ran to the next set of bushes. We all kind of followed it. We still couldn't get that photo. And you can see now that the leopard is pretty distressed by all this attention. So the next time it ran, the other game vehicles kept on after it. And I said to my guests, look, I know you've got a photo. It's not a good photo, but it is a photo. And I myself, I don't think I feel comfortable now to keep on pursuing this leopard around when it clearly just wants to be left alone. And then another example, sometimes it can quite inconvenience you. You want to give the animals right of way. This was just coming into the car park of our lodge. We have an elephant here. So we've been on game drive for about 3.5 hours. Everyone's pretty hungry. We could smell the steak cooking from here, but there was really no way around this elephant, and this elephant was not moving. And in this situation, all you could really do was just wait for it to make its decision on when it wanted to go somewhere else. So we actually had to, elephants don't like headlights. So we stopped, we turned off the lights, and we sort of sat in the darkness, listened to everyone else eating, and waited for this elephant to make its way so that we could get in and park and unload. So these responsibilities must take precedence over the satisfaction and enjoyment of your guests. Obviously, you want your guests to enjoy themselves, but the safety of the animals and the safety of the people comes first. If you're interested in becoming a safari guide yourself, probably the best route you would probably take would be to go to Southern Africa and to train as a safari guide there. The Field Guides Association of Southern Africa, they have designed most of the qualifications, which are then, what's the word? Validated, accredited by CASITA, which stands for Cultural Arts, Tourism, History, Sports, something association. So they validate in South Africa those qualifications. And then there are a number of different providers. And you can actually, you don't even need, you can do a lot of this on your own. They're not of the initial qualifications. You can self-study, but really the experience is far better if you would actually go and study with one of the providers, such as these ones. So eco training and Bushwise have probably come at some of the industry leaders. Eco training have 5 different camps, 4 in South Africa, 1 in Botswana. So if you go on their year-long course, you get to experience a lot of different habitats as you move from camp to camp. You are learning on the job by going out and doing activities in the morning and the afternoon, but then you're also taking lectures and taking different assessments for different qualifications. African Guide Academy, I think, is based in Botswana, if I'm not mistaken. Lowveld Trails, they specialize much more in walking safaris and helping people become more qualified to do walking trails. But the reality is if you want to be a field guide full-time in Southern Africa, you are not going to make a lot of money, and you're going to work really hard. And unless you're holding a local passport, you're also going to find it very hard to get a job, because very sensibly, the law won't allow an employer to give you a job as a guide when there are often many eligible locals also looking for that work. Having said that, certain desirable skills which are maybe in more demand are language skills. So if you can speak German, there might be a job for you in Namibia. If you speak French, there might be a job for you in, say, in the Congo. I have a friend who's guiding in the Congo at the moment, showing guests forest elephants and gorillas and wonderful things like that. Chinese is always valued. Horse riding safaris are becoming more and more popular. So if you're comfortable on a horse, even if there's an elephant next to you, then that's going to help. And then a lot of the smaller lodges will look for a management couple often who might have guiding skills, and they're going to take guests on safari, but you're also going to be doing all the books, doing all the maintenance, and basically running the lodge almost on your own. And then this would basically be all the different assessment levels that you would go through in Southern Africa. So you start with your basic level 1 qualification, and then as you accumulate more experience and pass different assessments, you sort of make your way up. And then at the top of the chain, you get to specialize in cool stuff like birding or wildflowers or even constellations, astronomy. So that's a little bit basically about the fundamentals of being a safari guide in Southern Africa. The rest of the talk, I want to focus especially on bushwalks, which I think are really, it's the best part about being on safari. So the question would be, why walk in the bush? Why walk in an area where you could run into something like a lion or a buffalo that could really mess up your day? And I think there's lots of great reasons why you should. It's a much more authentic experience. Even if you're in an open-topped safari vehicle, removing any barriers between you and the wild guarantee that you're going to have a really unique experience. I probably don't need to be telling people here this. I think everyone's on that wavelength. And that's, you know, in most of our lives, we are the top dogs, as it were. So, you know, there's not much out here that we need to worry about. But it's a kind of, you know, a lovely, humbling feeling to step out into the bush and realize, oh yeah, I am not on the top of the food chain now. There's quite a few things that I need to be very careful of. And there's a beauty to that, I think. Having said that, I'm always amazed by how normal it is. I remember the very first bushwalk I went on with Dave, who we heard impersonating a hyena earlier. Having this sense that as soon as we stepped outside of camp, I would somehow feel different, that I'd feel a sense of threat even. And really being quite surprised that actually walking in the African bush kind of feels very, very similar to going for a walk in the English countryside. And the smell of the flowers is pretty similar. The birds are singing slightly different songs, but it's still bird song. And even when you do come across a giraffe, you kind of look at it and go, okay, yeah, this is just an animal, actually. So that's a lovely feeling, to know that you don't really have to be so scared of it. And you get to notice all the little things that you would not see when you were driving around in a vehicle. You get to stop and look at the flowers and look at the trees. And if you've got a good guide, they're also going to be telling you a lot about those small, easily missed aspects, and showing you some bush skills. I'm going to show you a few things that you might come across. Any idea what the story of this piece of bark might be? Because this has been freshly stripped from a tree. So when you've come across where a herd of elephants has recently passed, you're going to find all kinds of sign. You're going to find tracks, you're going to find dung, and you're also going to find all of the bits of food that they've left behind. So for example, a piece of bark. You can pick it up, and if it's still a little bit damp, then you know that those elephants are not far away. You might come across a very carefully snipped twig here. Now, if you notice, you've got a little 45-degree angle here. This is very diagnostic of a very big and temperamental animal in the bush, the black rhino. So white rhinos are grazers, black rhinos are browsers. And when they're feeding, they always bite off the sticks that they're eating, the twigs, with this very distinctive 45-degree angle. So if you find this, you're like, okay, there's a black rhino around here. If you look at this piece of grass, you might notice there's a patch of white and a patch of brown. This is a marking left by a hyena. This is an olfactory territorial signal, which they deliver using their anal gland. So basically, hyena's wandering around. He wants to let other hyenas know that he's in the area. Find a nice piece of grass, wiggle your bottom, a little bit like that. And they leave this chemical trace so that other hyenas are going to come along and go, oh, Bob was here. And then, oh, that's a bit of a shame. One of the lovely tracks that I love here, you may not be able to see because I'm talking, it says. This is the track of a kudu. So kudu are antelope which prefer much thicker areas of the bush. They're not especially fast, so they're relying on stealth to keep them safe. And they have all kinds of tricks on that side, but one of the things that they will do is they will always, as they're moving, they'll put their front foot down and then they'll put their back foot in exactly the same place, just to halve the chance that they're going to step on a twig or rustle through the grass or the dead leaves, and they'll leave these very distinctive tracks where you have one footprint superimposed on the other. So these are all little things that you might pick up on your bushwalk. Having said all that, when you do run into something very big, it's pretty exciting. So there are a few animals that you have to be very, very aware of when you're walking in the bush. Any suggestions as to who you need to be scared about? So hippos, yes. Okay, so hippo is definitely one. Buffaloes, snakes, true, yes. Elephants, yeah. Yeah, so for people on bushwalks, for the guides, you know, the snakes you kind of run into or you don't run into. But in terms of what are you going to do about it if you run into, there are 6 animals you need to be thinking about. Lions, leopards, theoretically, but very rarely. Elephants, buffalo. Well, yeah, I mean, maybe most wild ostriches are going to run away from you. It's more the ones that have been imprinted on humans that upset you. Rhinos, and especially black rhinos. White rhinos are fairly chill. You do need to be careful with them. Black rhinos are rather belligerent. In fact, so belligerent that half of all male black rhinos die from fighting other rhinos. And hippos, yes, although if you're doing bushwalks, it's not so much of an issue because hippos are mainly spending their daylight hours in the water. It's more if you run across them at night where you're going to get into trouble. And as a rule, you're not going on bushwalks at night. As guides, the one thing that we probably are most concerned about of this group of animals are, in fact, the buffalo. Lions tend to run away most of the time. The leopard sees you, you never even knew it was there. Rhinos are fairly rare encounters in most cases. Elephants can be a problem, but they're clever and you can reason with them. Buffalo, not so much. And especially you want to be careful of what are called the Duggar boys. So the Duggar boys is a term for old male buffalo who have decided that life in the herd is really not worth it anymore because they're getting old and arthritic, and now they're at the back of the herd, and the only grass they get to eat is the grass that everyone else has already trampled on and pooed on. And at some point they go, enough of this. And they go and either with a few mates or on their own, they go and live in the thick bush, and their senses continue to fail them, and they get deafer and blinder and more paranoid because they know they're vulnerable. So the trouble is, if you run into one of these guys, and often they are in fairly thick bush, so it can be quite a close encounter, they tend to charge first and then ask questions afterwards. And they're buffalo, so their questions are not very deep. And you've already been squashed, so you don't really care at that stage. So you do need to think very carefully about how you manage potential encounters with dangerous game. One of the key things is just your awareness. So when you're assessed as a trails guide, most of your assessment is all about just being able to notice all the signs that could tell you that there's something in the area that you need to be cautious of. That can be obviously dung. An elephant's poop remains warm for about 15 minutes. So you can easily, if you stick your finger in and you think, okay, that's nice and cozy. Okay, this elephant was here quite recently. I must keep that in mind. You look out as well for tracks, fresh tracks. There's actually two dangerous tracks in this picture. This is a buffalo track. Down here would be a lion. Yeah, so this is obviously, the lion was like, oh, that's my dinner. I shall follow this guy. One thing which is also very useful for you as a guide is this bird. This is an oxpecker. You have two species, the red-billed and the yellow-billed. And oxpeckers, as I'm sure many of you know, they land on animals which can be as small as an impala or a warthog, up to a rhino or a buffalo, and they have like this little scissor-like beak, and they comb through the fur and seek out ticks to eat. They have a very distinctive call, this hissing call, which sounds like this. So as a guide, you're always listening to this call, because if you hear these birds fly over your head and you hear this call and then you see them zoom into the bushes ahead of you, well, they're landing on something, and that could be an impala, and that's no problem, but that could be a buffalo. So that's an important clue that there is something in the area that you need to be potentially wary of. Funnily enough, they don't really land on elephants. I don't know whether it's the elephants, maybe their hide is too thick for the ticks. That could be it, or the elephants just find them annoying and swipe them off with their trunks. And then another thing that you'll be aware of is alarm calls. We mentioned just now, this is a kudu, this is a female kudu. They have extremely loud bark. So if you hear this consistently, then you know this kudu has probably seen a leopard or a lion, and there's one in the area. Something else that you might notice are giraffes. Giraffes have an excellent vantage point to survey the terrain. If they see something dangerous, they just stare at it fixedly. So if you're walking, most giraffes are going to look at you and go, oh, humans, and they're going to stare at you. If they're not staring at you and they're staring at something over there in the grass, that's probably something dangerous. Monkeys also have useful alarm calls, so they'll also alarm for leopards and lions. Although monkeys will also make alarm calls for snakes and birds of prey. They actually have different alarm calls for different threats. But this is the big cat threat.
Ouais.
Hi. So you want to know what is around and what you need to be careful of. But if you get the chance and you can do it safely, you're actually going to seek out an encounter with that animal. So what you're really hoping you're able to do is to be able to observe the animal in a safe way, in a way that it does not even know that you were ever there, that you don't disturb it in any way. That doesn't happen every time. But you might see an animal in the distance and think, oh, okay, we can get closer to this animal, probably using cover so it's not going to see us. Find a good viewing location, which might be safe, like it's up on a little hill. Or you might see animals coming towards you and think, okay, well, if we just stay here, these elephants are going to walk right in front of us. In some cases as well, where animals are a bit more habituated to humans, then they will come quite close to you and remain fairly calm. But you always have to be very aware of the safety of your guests, the safety of the animals. That's the most important thing. So that supersedes any desire to have a close encounter. You're only going to try and have a close encounter if you know that you can do it in a safe way, or you think you're pretty certain you can do it in a safe way. And most encounters are very, very relaxed experiences. So this video is from Makalali Game Reserve, where we would like to take some people from the Dubai Natural History Group at some stage.
Hi, we're in a lion sighting, sitting down, all relaxed, and the lions are right over there, whilst having our broodjies.
So yeah, we just stopped for lunch, and these lions came down to drink at the river here. The river is super shallow, so it's a kind of a theoretical barrier, but not one that really matters. But the lions knew we were there. They didn't see us as a threat. They just wanted to drink. No, well, they rarely do see you as lunch. Well, you know, humans are a dangerous contention. So they were just like, we need to drink. And oh, there are these people here, but they look chill. So they came and drank and then rested on the bank for about half an hour and then walked away. So in many cases, encounters are just like this. But you do have to make sure that you know what to do if something goes slightly awry. So you make sure before your walk even starts that your guests understand the rules. So you ask your guests to walk in silence, first of all, just so you can enjoy the experience of nature, but also because you need to be listening out for alarm calls, for oxpeckers, or the sounds that might indicate that there's an animal in the area. You ask them to walk in line, so that makes it very easy for you to just glance behind you and make sure everyone's with you. And also, if you've got a big bunch of people, that's a bit more intimidating if you do run into an animal. Obviously, you ask them to stay behind the rifles. You make sure they follow directions, and the final rule is do not run. There's nothing that you can outrun in the African bush. With the exception, we worked out that Usain Bolt can run faster than a hippo, but we're not sure if he can run faster than a hippo for the correct amount of time it would take for that hippo to get exhausted. So a lot of these interactions are all about projecting confidence, because at the end of the day, an animal does not want to tangle with you if it can help it. It's a last resort. So if you're confident, then in most cases, that is enough to diffuse any encounter. We can look at a few potentially more exciting encounters. If you're making an approach, you're also thinking very carefully about the wind direction. So where is your scent blowing? Which direction the light is coming. So if the light is shining towards you, then you're going to be very obvious You're thinking about cover that you can use to conceal your approach. And you're also thinking about what escape routes are there for you and your group and for the animal as well. So, because you want to make sure that if that animal wants to get away from you, it has lots of options. You don't want to be in a position where its only option to get away is through where you are. And you're looking very carefully at the temperament of the animals. Are they relaxed? If they're already agitated, then that's not an encounter that you want to get into. And in many cases, especially say with elephants, it can be quite easy to get an idea of how they feel. Elephants are very expressive. So here, this is in the north of Kruger in Papuri in the fever tree forest. And my friend Wayne and his guests have encountered 3 young bull elephants who are not very calm.
Okay.
So these elephants are doing a few things to intimidate them.
No worries.
They've got their ears out to make them look bigger. Standing tall, so they will kind of like peer down at you. Get a bit of noise, knock a bit of vegetation around.
No problem.
And basically express that they would like you to go away. But Wayne has some good advice here.
Hey, come on. You're not looking for trouble. Boys.
The guys are just talking very calmly to the elephant. The elephants especially are going to pick up on your temperament. You're calm, and they're going to start to calm down and see that they're not actually a threat.
Never know what to say in a situation like this. I think we should keep talking, which is never the right thing to say. But, the more we keep talking, the more they realize we relax. If we relax, then hopefully that'll calm them down.
So must we talk then?
Yeah, if we just talk softly, I think it's fine. Because, yeah, I think they pick up body language very well, and they can pick up a vibe, you know.
Yeah.
And if we're nervous and we're aggressive or something, that's likely to. Aggression often works with them as well, but I'd rather have a chill vibe sort of response, you know, and hopefully just they can move off softly if possible.
Some guides will even use a bit of sweet talk. I've heard some really good lines be delivered to an elephant in an attempt to make it feel in a happier mood. Sometimes, though, you know, circumstances can be that a bad situation can come to you even when you are hoping for, you know, even if you've done everything right. So in this video down here, the guides have a slightly more hair-raising experience.
Right at us. How's this?
These guys are just having a rest in the middle of their walk. And this big herd of elephants has appeared. And you can kind of tell by the speed that they're moving that these elephants have already been upset by something. So they're already in a sort of a bad mental space. They're disturbed. They're moving very fast. You'd only really see elephants moving this fast if they're really thirsty and they're racing to get to the water, or if they're upset and they're trying to get away from something.
Come on. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
So in this situation, you need to be a bit firmer. This is not a sweet talk situation.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Hey! 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 Nice, go! Get! Hey!
Well done for not
That's a little
shooting,
bit
boys.
more hair-raising. So if you do get charged by an animal, you need to stand your ground And there you're going to make a lot of noise, and you're going to do everything you can to tell that animal that that you're equally dangerous, yes, and that it doesn't want to get into your space, that you really just want to leave each other alone. And in most cases, as it was in this case, just making a lot of noise is going to be sufficient to deter a charging animal, and it's going to break away. It's made its point, and hopefully it's going to leave you in peace. Because the sad reality is that if it really gets any closer, then probably a few steps closer for that elephant, the only option then for those guides to protect their guests is to shoot. And your only option in this situation is to shoot to kill. You can't really, there's no tranquilizer dart which is going to have an effect quickly enough to stop that elephant. And as we looked at before, you know, your ultimate responsibility is the safety of your guests. So this is an incredibly rare event, but you do have to be prepared for it. So in South Africa, all trails guides will complete an advanced rifle handling assessment. That's something you have to do every 3 years. And it's a 6-stage assessment. If you fail any part, then you fail the whole thing. Usually you're using a bolt action rifle. That's the safest rifle that you would carry on a walk. Most of these exercises you do under timed conditions. So first you have to show that you can load the rifle blindfolded very quickly. You have an accuracy test where you have to hit the target, I think 5 times in a row. You have a distance test where you have to shoot different targets at different ranges in time conditions. And an immediate action assessment. So that's where you'll be given a blank to simulate a misfire. So you fire your rounds, one of them will not go off. You have to remove it safely, reload, and complete the drill, again, in a very short space of time. The 5th one is very quick shot placement, where you'll have another guide beside you also firing at the same time. Because if you're walking in the bush, you're going to have 2 guides who will both be armed, the lead guide and the backup. And then the most difficult part is you do a simulated charge where you have to be able to hit a moving target and effectively get a kill shot, get a shot between the eyes, which looks like this.
All right. All right. Stand still, stay behind me.
Well, you've got to hit it before it hits the tire. So your first round is live, and then the rest are just blanks to simulate. But effectively, what you would do, you would shoot 2 bullets, and then you go and you reload and you check by effectively touching the eye of the animal with the end of your rifle to check that it's dead. Because the worst situation is that you might shoot it, scare it away, but you've maybe mortally wounded this poor beast and it's run off into the bush, and now it becomes your responsibility to call the authorities and say, yeah, we met this really angry buffalo, and now it's a really angry wounded buffalo, and it's out there somewhere, and they're going to be like, all right, James, can you go find it for us? So you have to be prepared for the worst. Having said that, that situation is incredibly rare. I have a lot of colleagues who have spent their whole lives working as trails guides, and maybe half of them have perhaps had to shoot an animal once in their career. Many of them have never actually been in that situation, despite the fact that they're walking every day, often for many hours, and they've probably got hundreds of encounters under their belt. So For example, yeah, my friend Jan, who has been mentoring me recently, he's been a trails guide for 30 years. He's loaded his rifle just once and didn't have to fire. So it is very unlikely, but you have to be ready just in case. So is it worth it? Is it worth walking in the bush if there is this chance that you could end up having to kill something on that balance? Well, as I said, you know, these kind of encounters, although you have to be ready, are very rare. I would also argue that, you know, given that those moments are very rare, we have a right to be in the wilderness. We've been part of the wilderness for hundreds of years, well, 2 million years, in fact. And a lot of those times we weren't living as we do now. We were just hunter-gathering from the land, just almost like any other animal. And you see that in the reactions of the animals that you encounter. They recognize you. If you're an elephant, maybe it recognizes you from experience, but most of these animals, they see a human and they have this instinctual knowledge that, this shape I know means danger. And I know that from generations upon generations upon generations of encounters with humans. We're part of that food chain. And sadly, I think these days it's probably naive to just think that the wilderness is going to look after itself. We have to think about how we can make the wilderness pay its way effectively. And perhaps one of the best ways and the least invasive ways we can do that is by walking in the bush. And to go back to Sir David Attenborough, you know, no one's going to protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. And I think for many people, one of the most profound experiences in nature you can have is walking in true wilderness. The ultimate, for me, are these wilderness trails that you can embark upon in Africa, where you might be doing a multi-day walk in the wilderness through an area with dangerous game. You're completely off grid. Your phone doesn't work. There's no reason to even turn it on. In most cases, you're carrying everything you need. You're not taking a tent because you're walking in the dry season. So every night you're just sleeping directly under the stars, listening to the lions roar, listening to the hyenas. Beatrice is not there. In those situations, as a group, you all take a turn on a night watch. So each of you will probably have an hour where you'll stay up and you'll look after your companions and just be listening and scanning. And if you hear something big and scary heading your way, you go and wake up the guide and say, I think there's something out there. And yeah, you carry everything you need. If you need water, depending on where you are. So I went on a hike in the Kalahari a couple of years ago. We had water drops at different locations that we were walking to and from. If you're somewhere a bit wetter, like Northern Kruger, then you're going to take some purification tablets. So this is filling up in, I think this is the Luvuvu River. So our lead guide, Rhodes, he's taking everybody's water bottles, filling them up. He's the only one at the water's edge because of crocodiles. He rather optimistically has me standing there with a rifle. And I'm like, Rhodes, if a crocodile comes, I mean, by the time I've even noticed, you're already gone. Luckily, he's quite old and bony, so they didn't bother. So yeah, so that's kind of it when it comes to talking about walking in the bush. Very quickly before I end, I'm just going to quickly touch upon, so my current role here, I work for Sharjah Safari. I've been there since 2022. So it's an 800-hectare site, which is run by the Environment and Protected Areas Authority of Sharjah Safari. And the aim is to try and create an African safari experience in the UAE. All of our guides are locals. So my main role is trying my best to train about 100 Emiratis from the local community who work at the park. We've got all of the iconic African species, and also a few rather special, critically endangered species, such as the addax. And do come visit us on Saturday, the 8th of March. The Dubai Natural History Group will be coming to see the safari. And what we're also hoping to do is to organize a safari in September to Makalali private game reserve. Sonia and I are in the final stages of planning this, so hopefully there'll be an email going out soon. We'll be going for a week to Makalali Game Reserve, staying at this lovely little lodge called Jobs Holt. This is literally about 100 meters away from where we were watching those lions in the previous video. And we want to give members of the Natural History Group the chance to, to have a bit more of a more in-depth safari experience. It's not all going to be about trying to see the big five. It's more going to be about the complete holistic experience. So everything from the grasses up to the big animals. But Makalali is a big five reserve, so all of the exciting animals can be found there. It's especially good for lions. And we'll be doing daily walks, game drives, and we're hoping one of the nights we'll also spend out in the bush, sleeping under the stars, asking you guys to be on watch. To stay awake, please stay awake, otherwise things can go wrong. Anyway, so that's about it from me. Thank you for your patience. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Yes.
What did you put in the crocodile?
Actually, that's quite interesting because I pulled it out the river with a lot of the local guys who are employed from the village down the way. What they did with that crocodile is they got a panga and they cut out its teeth because the teeth, have some special magical properties. So having an amulet made from a croc's tooth, they were very vague about what exactly it does. Might be something bedroom related, perhaps, but they were pretty excited about it. And then I mean, it died naturally, so the rest of it we left for the vultures and the jackals to find, and they disposed of it pretty fast. Yeah, Charles.
Yeah, when you're doing these multi-day trucks,
Yeah.
how do you take all the food with you? Freeze-dried food? You don't hunt game.
No. So yeah, you would take all the food with you. So your pack's pretty heavy at the beginning, and it's getting lighter and lighter and lighter. Yes, so what we would normally do, depending on where you're walking, in some areas they're just like wherever you want, but leave no trace. In other places, they have specific spots where they're expecting you to camp. Although there's always the unexpected. So I remember on one trip we did, one of our guests actually got sick, and we had to evacuate her. So we ended up camping in some completely random spot that we hadn't expected to. But what you'll do, you'll make a fire. The fire is not big because the fire, it's not like a lovely night out in the desert. It's as small as it can possibly be. The fire is more an indicator to passing animals in the night that there are humans there and they should stay away. So it's just not for cooking. No. You take a gas burner for your cooking. And then in the morning, you'll bury all remains of the fire. You pack up. And then as a group, we will do a sweep through the camping area. So just to make sure that we haven't even left the tiniest little wrapper or anything behind. Yeah.
You have to put the food in a tree or something.
No, I mean most of I mean sadly it's not that delicious. So most of you, mainly you've got it's just instant meals, a cup of soup, kind of. Lions have better taste than that. I mean, the only thing with regards to food, what has happened a couple of times is you're not hunting anything, but on the trip I did in the Kalahari, we had this wonderful moment where we stumbled across an ostrich egg. And our guide, Wayne, he was like, you know what, this ostrich egg, yeah, I know that the Bushmen, they used to carry their water in these eggs. So I'm going to drain this and I'm going to try and make my own authentic water carrier out of it. But like, stand back, everybody, because this has obviously been out in the sun for a while, and this is probably going to explode in our faces. And then he drilled a little hole with his Leatherman to blow out the contents, and he had a sniff, and this look of amazement went across his face, and he's like, "This is completely fresh." And we walked a bit further, and we found the remains of an ostrich's nest with lots of broken eggs inside. So we surmised that a hyena had come along, found this nest, was having a feast, picked up the last one probably to bury it and take it away for later, then ran into us and was like, "Oh, people," dropped it and ran away. So we were like, well, okay, we have a scrambled egg, and that's what we made, scrambled eggs from the ostrich egg. And there was more than we could possibly eat. Yes, I think an ostrich egg can make the equivalent of, I think it's about 24 chicken eggs in terms of content. Yeah, we were 8. Yeah, yeah, and we I mean, we tried our best, but we were full. Yeah, yeah. And I know they also told me that on a previous trip, they also stumbled across a zebra that had just been dispatched by a pride of lions. And they bumped into this pride of lions while they were feeding, and the lions ran away. And, and they very cheekily cut a strip off the zebra and took it with them and cooked it that evening and left the rest. Yes, sorry, at the back there was a... Sorry.
Survive.
Well, it would have had to, the female would have had to have come and found it and returned it to the nest, and that's not going to happen. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was freshly laid, effectively. Yeah.
Did you ever find out what that antelope dome looked like?
Yeah. That was because I was thinking about the lesser known antelope in that area were roan antelope and lechwe. I think I did. I think I've subsequently forgotten again. I should. I will take a picture. Yeah, or just carry some around to show people if they're asked. Yeah. So I mean, that's sort of part of the trouble. There's so much to learn. You learn all this information and you're using it every day. But if you move to a new place and you don't have those animals anymore, well, at least for me, it very quickly starts to trickle out again. Yeah, straight in here. Yes. Mm.
Who owns the land typically in these places? Is it owned by private? Is it government? Reserve?
It's a variety. So there are national parks. So for example, in Namibia, I was working in a national park. They had a special concession from the government to build the lodge, but the government owned the land. At Makalali Game Reserve, that's privately owned. So, and often you find that, you can, for example, in South Africa, in most national parks, you don't really have much freedom to do bushwalks, for example. Whereas in game reserves, because they're privately owned, there is a lot more flexibility to sort of do it. I think so. Yes, I think yes. It's that potential that something could go wrong, and they'd rather just not worry about that. So, for example, in Kruger National Park in South Africa, huge area. I think there's only one trail where they do a walking trail. It's very, I mean, apparently it's beautiful, but it's very clearly defined, and the rest is out of bounds. And Kruger is a national park, so the government are running it. Yeah. Oh, okay. John?
Too many Daptanis or other programs where it was a charging elephant or an animal that they would just discharge a weapon, not into the air rather.
In very specific circumstances, sometimes you might do that. But the general thinking is that if you fire a warning shot and it doesn't work, Well, now this elephant is still coming and you've got to reload to actually fire your second shot. So you're just often putting yourself at a disadvantage. Or if it's an aggravated animal which is not charging yet, the sound of that gunshot might be enough to irritate enough that it does decide to charge you. So when we were trained, we were very much told no warning shots. I have seen some situations with some very experienced guides when you've got both guides carrying rifles, where the lead has said to the backup, fire a warning shot. And in that particular case that I saw, he fired a shot into the ground in front of the elephant. So it also shot up a load of earth, and in that case, the elephant did move away, and the lead still has a loaded weapon ready if it doesn't work. But in general, it's usually more risky than it is helpful. Yeah. And so.
Yeah, another question. Like, did you already encounter poachers or
Yes. Yeah, unfortunately, it depends where you are, but I did a lot of my training in an area called Makuleki, which is a concession area just on the edge of Kruger National Park, and it's right up against the border with Zimbabwe. So you have the Limpopo River, which is the border, but the Limpopo River a lot of the time is running dry. So poachers, or just local people in Zim who are basically struggling to get by, will cross over the dry river, enter the bush, and then they will poach. But what they'll do, they'll set snares. So they're usually not hunting with rifles or with weapons. They just get lots of wire snares, put out loads of them all over the area, come back in a few days and see if any of those snares have caught an animal. And they're looking for basically smaller gazelles, antelope that they can easily carry back home. But these snares are indiscriminate, so they'll catch lions, hyenas. Sadly, sometimes you'll see elephants who have got their trunk caught in a snare. That gets infected, and the elephant will lose part of its trunk because of the snares. And we would then, we would often, when we were doing our training walks, there was a couple of ridges that we would climb up on, and you'd appear on this ridge, quite visible, and then you'd see all these guys running back over the river, having seen you, because they weren't sure whether whether you were a group or an anti-poaching patrol. And in one case, there was even like some guys, they had like a donkey and a cart, which they were pushing back across the dry riverbed as fast as they could. Yeah, but rarely. So that's what you're much more likely to encounter. Obviously, there are some pretty hairy encounters which happen occasionally with people who are hunting rhino or elephants or poaching, and they're much more serious situations because these are guys who are carrying automatic weapons, and they're probably been part of some militia or warband over a border somewhere, and in those situations you really don't want to run into these guys. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So there are guys that are very well trained and very knowledgeable about this, but then also very much art.
Yes.
So for anyone who's looking for like tourism kind of adventure, what would you ask a facility about their guides training? What would you specifically ask them for? How informed their guides are?
Yes. Well, I think if you're in Southern Africa, then you're probably, there's a good chance you can find somewhere which has good guides, but you would ask them, what qualifications do your guides have? So if they say to you, and they'll probably mention FIRGASA, which is the Field Guides Association of South Africa, which is the main provider. It's a little bit, things are getting a little bit political at the moment, and there's a lot of changes going on with the qualifications. But the shorthand would be like a level 1 guide. They've passed their basic assessment, which means that they could be really good, but it means that they could be fairly average. But it goes from level 1, level 2, level 3. So a level 2 guide should have a pretty deep level of knowledge to get that qualification. If you've got a level 3 guide, then you know you're really, dealing with somebody who's quite knowledgeable. But in reality, most level 3 guides are probably not working at lodges. They're probably running their own safari operations, and thus they're going to be probably more expensive, although not if you come on our trip in September. Not to say that I'm not a level 3 trained guide, but our co-guide Jan certainly is. I mean, he's an instructor. So yeah, if it's Southern Africa, ask them what qualifications do your guides have, and if they start mentioning Fagasa and they start mentioning especially like level 2 or above, then you should be in pretty good hands. Or just see how expensive the safari is. And if it's quite reasonable, odds are the guides are not going to be that great. And if it's a bit more expensive, then you're going to be like, well, okay, at least the guide should know what he's talking about. Yeah. Okay.
When you're talking about the shooting assessment,
Yeah.
you mentioned that there are several stages.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, effectively, yeah. So you have a 3-year window to pass this assessment, and it's quite an expensive assessment. So you don't want to try and renew your assessment a few weeks before it's up. You need to. So, for example, you might think, okay, my assessment is going to expire in 6 months' time. I better try and repass it. I don't know if there's a limit on how many times you can fail. You know, Eleanor, can you? No. But yeah, you can't afford to fail it multiple times because it's expensive. So yeah, you'll take it. So for example, when we were planning to hopefully do a trip last year, I was on the 2nd year of my 3-year qualification. But I was thinking ahead to, well, what if I want to do a safari in 2025? I don't want to go to South Africa ready to do a bushwalk with people, but knowing that first I have to pass this assessment, and if I fail this assessment, I can't do this trip. So I made the point to take the assessment last year, so that I can be a bit more relaxed and know that if I fail it, then I will at least have another chance next time I'm in South Africa. Luckily, I passed. Yeah. That's good. That's a good point. To be honest, I can't. I mean, if you make an income in the UAE, it's fine. It's not something you want to do repeatedly, but yeah. But certainly, if you're earning in South Africa, yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not insignificant. Although, if you are employed by a lodge, they will probably be saying, okay, the lodge will probably say everyone's going to do their assessment on this date. And there'll probably be several dates that you get the chance, but maybe if you fail it multiple times, they'll be like, all right, James, we don't really need you anymore because you keep failing this assessment. Eleanor. 2006. Yeah. 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 But bear in mind, that's the cost of the assessment. So you also need to factor in, you're also going to pay for the bullets you fire. Somebody's going to be renting the rifle range that you're doing it at. So there's other costs that are going to come in as well. Yes. That's true. Yeah.
Or do you have to do a bit of retraining within that 3 years?
Well, that is very true, and so I mean, legally that's the only requirement. I mean, it's not easy. So if you've not done any practice and you just go there and try and do it, you're probably not going to pass. But technically, no. Once you've got your certificate, it's valid for 3 years, and then at the end of that 3 years, you have to do it again. What most guides would then do, especially again if they're at a big lodge, is that they will get days when they can go to a rifle range and they can practice the skills and keep them fresh. But it is tricky because yeah, you'll spend all your time focused on passing this assessment, and then you probably spend your whole career and never have to actually fire your weapon. Yeah.
So if you're licensed or like whatever, it's 3 years,
Mm.
you decided to go a little bit further, you still have like 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And fail. So are you still allowed to be guide until the end of those 3 years?
Yes, no, because you asked it because yeah, so you're still within the first time you passed. So yeah, so you just got to make sure you've passed it before it expires. Yeah.
Yeah, you talked about weapons training and all that.
Mm.
What about the first aid CPR?
Yeah, so every guide should have a valid. So that's similar to the rifle training. I think it's every 2 or 3 years you need to do a wilderness first aid course. Yeah. So that was for us. That was like when we did our training. That was the very first part of our training. We spent a week doing wilderness first aid, going through different scenarios. A lot of talk about what different snake venoms will do to you, which is kind of fascinating, but also a little alarming. John?
Or heat signatures, or is it all done by your own gut feeling?
Yeah, so in most cases, those the resources for those kind of things are not available. There are some interesting gadgets going on. So, for example, at Salati Game Reserve, where I've spent some time training, all of their iconic animals, they have black rhino, white rhino, they have lions, they have elephants. They're all collared. They actually have an app that a guide can download onto his phone, which will tell you in real time where those animals are. So you can completely skip all of your everything you've learned in tracking and just go, all right, yeah, the black rhino, it's put in some directions right over here, 200 meters. So yes, that's one example. Yeah, not really. I mean, obviously, sometimes some people might have a thermal imaging camera, and that's great, and that's very, easy to spot things. But I also, for your guests, that unless you've got one for everybody, it's not super useful. So when you are doing a night drive, you're just really you've got a torch, a very high-powered torch, which you're sweeping back and forth, and you're looking for eye shine, and you see some eye shine and you have a look, and if you're doing this ethically, you quickly identify, is this animal a day animal or a nocturnal animal? If it's a diurnal animal, then you leave it well alone because their eyes are not adapted to, they're easily dazzled. You don't want to leave some poor impala blinded and stumbling around in the dark. But if it's a nocturnal animal, they should have, is it called a papillum lucidum, I think, is this eye lining, which will constrict, and that so it's not so easy for them to get blinded. Also, sometimes you might have a red filter, which is less invasive, and then you can then view that animal in the dark without causing too much disturbance to it. Yeah.
When you were in South Africa, you used to also, guys used to also have trackers. There were a lot of African guys who were really good.
Yeah.
And even if you were driving, they would just point. I mean, they were.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so a lot of lodges, if they, depending on how big they are, you would have, if you're going on a game drive, you have your guide, and then you have your tracker, who will probably sit either on the front of the vehicle or he might walk with you, and they're looking for tracks to work at. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I once spent a morning with a guy who's he's Shangani. His name is Innocent Ngwenya, which translates as innocent crocodile, which is brilliant. Lovely man, and such an excellent tracker that we went tracking an individual elephant in a herd of elephants with him. So yeah, he looked at the footprints. He was like, okay, yeah, we're going to follow this guy. And you're like, what? Okay, because every elephant's footprint is unique, you know, by all the cracks that they have. So we were tracking these elephants, and then he would stop us and go, okay, so where's our elephant from all of these footprints? And of course we were hopeless trying to identify that individual, but every time he was like, no, actually our elephant went this way.
Yeah. I'm going to I think we're all beginning to feel like we're on safari, but let's take you off your feet and
Okay.
watch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.